It's been a few days since the election result, and while things have kind of slowed down, the drama is still trickling out. First thing to mention, tomorrow at 11 a.m., the Prime Minister is holding a press conference where he's going to outline the new government's priorities. So I will definitely be watching that, and I will keep you guys posted. The second big story is there has been a change in the number of seats the Liberals won. It looks like they actually just lost one to the Bloc Québécois after an Elections Canada vote validation process. The Bloc candidate for the riding of Terrebonne confirmed this in a post on her Facebook page today. Basically, after the Liberal candidate initially thought that she won by 35 votes, a vote validation process found that actually the Bloc Québécois candidate won by 44 votes. This is all the normal process, and next it's actually going to go to a judicial recount, so that will give us the final confirmation of who won this riding. But as things stand, it looks like the Liberals actually only have 168 seats, which means that they'll need 4 votes from other parties to be able to pass any legislation, assuming this is the correct and final outcome. Other than these two developments, the day was relatively quiet on the news front. It was especially quiet for Pierre Poilievre, who still hasn't spoken publicly since officially learning that he had lost his seat early Tuesday morning. By the way, like the Prime Minister, in Canada, the leader of the official opposition gets a very fancy taxpayer-funded mansion to live in. But because Poilievre lost his own seat and is technically ineligible to be the leader of the opposition, because according to the parliamentary rules, you have to have a seat in the House of Commons to have that role, there is a very good chance he is going to have to move out of that house. But we'll see. However, while Poilievre has largely been silent, several members of the broader conservative movement have been loudly discussing the party's future online. Poilievre's MPs continue to publicly stand behind him, but some conservative pundits and strategists have been allowing the infighting to leak onto Twitter. It is genuinely wild and juicy to watch, especially if you know who these people are, so let me give you the tea. Like this guy here, Nick Cuvalas, is Doug Ford's pollster. He polls weekly for the Ontario PCs. And he responded to newly re-elected Conservative MP Jamil Javani posting this image of Doug Ford ripping off an Ontario PC shirt to reveal the Liberal t-shirt underneath, obviously a fake image to be clear, by suggesting that Javani will give up his seat for Pierre Poilievre and that he should take over the Conservative Party's socials. In case you thought he meant this in a nice way, it becomes pretty clear he didn't. Meanwhile, a very online, very right-wing conservative commentator who works for like True North / Juno News, yeah, those guys, she replied to Nick, "You created the fat pictured here." They had a little back and forth, and Ford's pollster ended up telling some other Twitter user to, quote, go talk to his boyfriends Andrew Scheer and Jamil Javani. Meanwhile, a former Ontario MPP who was booted from Doug Ford's caucus after she met with the hateful anti-Islam agitator Tommy Robinson called Ford a liar while defending Pierre Poilievre. And a guy who helped crown Danielle Smith in Alberta, though she's since kind of distanced herself from him, came out and said Poilievre thinking he can stay as leader is an indictment on the CPC. Although that's not how you spell indictment. He also left a few laughing emojis in response to Ford's pollster calling out Poilievre. By the way, this is the bottom of that Ford guy's tweet that David Parker, who was Danielle Smith's guy, was laughing at. It's just so messy. So the infighting is continuing to heat up on socials, all while Poilievre is reportedly making calls to shore up support within his own party. That's according to reporting from CBC's JP Tasker. But overall, it does seem like most pundits, well-sourced journalists, and any conservative MPs who have spoken publicly aren't describing there being much appetite for a change in leadership. Though I can't help but wonder, is this because there's actually no appetite for change? Or is it because of a kind of game of chicken happening where no one wants to be the first to make a move on Poilievre? Because if others don't swiftly hop in and join in the political backstabbing, Poilievre is known to be quite the pit bull. So I guess on those things we'll just have to wait and see. But in the meantime, I'm really enjoying just watching all of the infighting on Twitter. So please, feel free to keep keep it coming. The only other somewhat interesting development that's happened in the last 24 hours has to do with Green Party leader Elizabeth May. She told CTV that she is open to becoming Speaker of the House. That's the person who kind of sits in the middle of the House of Commons and yells at the MPs to shut up, but, you know, professionally, when they're all just acting like idiots and screaming at each other. She told CTV that she's always wanted to be Speaker, and she said that many times. And she also said she's open to a position in Mark Carney's cabinet, provided she would still be under the Green Party banner. And to be fair to Elizabeth May, she only said that because CTV put that question to her. And in her response, May laughed and said that that's pretty hypothetical. So before you guys totally drag May for being delulu, this is more about the kinds of questions she was being asked than her actually running around and making these suggestions herself. At least on the cabinet front. She seems like she actually is pretty down for the speaker thing. But given the last speaker was just re-elected and seems to want to do it again, I don't know how good her chances are. Speaking of delulu, there is one last thing I want to mention, and it has to do with comments Donald Trump made this week that people are kind of running with. Speaking about how Carney's campaign really focused on the US threats and the tariffs, Trump said, quote, he was running for office. Quote, they both hated Trump, and it was the one that hated Trump, I think, the least that won. I actually think the conservative hated me much more than the so-called liberal. The first thing I'd say about that is I'm not sure that's a totally accurate read. In fact, Poilievre was criticized for not sufficiently running against Trump and his tariffs earlier in the campaign, for not pivoting to doing that. So really, if any candidate hated Trump more, though I don't think either candidate really used rhetoric that reflected that, it would have been Carney because he spent his whole campaign running against the US agenda. Rather than being any kind of read against Carney or Poilievre, this to me seems more like Trump just wanting to make sure that Trump looks good.
The only people who win elections who are loved by their people have to love me too. If you hate me, that's a losing strategy.
Right? Doesn't that kind of track? I'm sorry, my impression is not as good as Mark Critch's. But honestly, I think that Trump will eventually hate whoever our prime minister is, whether it had been Poilievre or is, as it is right now, Mark Carney, because he seems like a guy who hates anyone who doesn't give him exactly what he wants. So we'll see how this and everything else I mentioned in this video plays out. I'll be back tomorrow, but until then, what do you think of all this?